Hello. My name is Luna. I used to believe that growing older meant things would slow down, gentle mornings, peaceful coffee, maybe even the sound of birds in silence. Not confrontation. But I've come to learn that aging doesn't always come with dignity. Sometimes, it comes with invisible bruises, the kind no one talks about. Because they happen in kitchens instead of battlefields. It was an ordinary Thursday morning in Austin, Texas. I was sitting at the breakfast bar in my son Blake's spacious kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee from a ceramic mug with "World's Best Grandma" painted in cheerful blue. The sun spilled in from the big window over the sink, and I remember thinking, just for a moment, maybe this is home. Maybe I'm safe here. Then Emma walked in 16. Sharp nails. Sharper words. She barely looked up from her phone when she asked, "Grandma, can I use your Amex again? There's this online influencer boot camp I need. It's only $3. Babe. I didn't flinch. I just said, no. Sweetheart. Not this time. That's when the air shifted. It wasn't Emma who snapped first, it was Chloe, my former daughter-in-law. She still came around. Practically lived here half the week. She stood up from the breakfast table, leaned against the counter like a villain in a movie, and said flatly, "You've been freeloading here since your shoulder injury. The least you can do is support your granddaughter's future." Before I could respond, Emma rolled her eyes and reached for her smoothie dragon fruit and oat milk. The kind that stains. She tipped the cup right into my lap. Cold. Sticky liquid soaked into my cotton pants. I gasped. More from the humiliation than the temperature. Blake said nothing. He didn't even look up from his laptop. And then came Chloe's voice, sharper than the sting in my thighs. "Maybe it's time you think about assisted living. We're not your retirement plan." Luna. I stood there wet, trembling, invisible, for a long, breathless second. No one moved. No one offered a towel, a kind word, or even eye contact. I was no longer a guest. I was an inconvenience. The silence was louder than any insult. That morning didn't just mark the end of breakfast. It marked the end of illusion. For months I'd been telling myself this was temporary, that they were helping me. But in that moment, with a smoothie dripping down my leg and my heart pounding in my chest, I saw it clearly. They weren't helping. They were managing me. Like a project. Like a burden. And in that silence, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg to belong. I wasn't going to explain my worth. I was going to get up, wipe myself off, and leave that house, not just the address, but everything it represented. Because dignity may not come easy when you're 67, but it's never too late to take it back. I didn't say a word. Not when Emma walked off like she hadn't just humiliated me in front of her parents. Not when Chloe went back to scrolling through Zillow listings like she hadn't just told me I was no longer welcome. And not even when Blake stood up, stretched, and walked away, never once looking in my direction. That's what stung the most. Not the smoothie on my legs, not the shame pooling in my chest, but that no one acknowledged what had just happened. As if I were a shadow fading into the wallpaper. I walked back to the guest room. Or, as they like to call it, your little space. The same room Blake proudly told everyone he'd renovated for me after my shoulder surgery. It had no windows, just a twin bed, a small nightstand, and a television mounted too high to watch comfortably. The door didn't lock. Not that it mattered. What I needed now wasn't privacy. It was clarity. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. I had a sudden urgent thought, and reached for my purse. Something didn't feel right. I unzipped the main compartment. No wallet. Checked the side pocket. Nothing. By the time I emptied the contents onto the bed, lip balm, tissues, a half-used lotion, and a grocery store receipt from 3 days ago I already knew. My wallet was gone. My bank card. My ID. Everything. I had it just yesterday. At the pharmacy, Chloe had insisted on walking in with me, saying she wanted to help carry the ointment. She'd offered to hold my purse while I walked slower, steadying myself on the shelves. Back then, I thought she was being kind. God, how blind I was. I looked around the room, the walls that weren't mine, the furniture I never chose, the life I had quietly surrendered one small favor at a time. I had given them my passwords, my mail, my calendar, all in the name of healing, all because I was too tired, too grateful, too trusting. I'd mistaken control for care. Suddenly, the walls felt like they were closing in. Not physically, but emotionally. Like I was being compressed into a smaller and smaller version of myself. I stood, ignoring the ache in my shoulder, and opened the closet. My suitcase was still there, tucked high on the shelf. I dragged over a chair to reach it. As I pulled it down, a small envelope fluttered from between the zipper folds. I opened it. Inside were a few folded documents I had printed months ago, bank routing numbers, insurance cards, even a handwritten note from my younger self that read, "Just in case you forget who you are." I hadn't forgotten. I had just gone quiet, and in that moment, I realized silence wasn't weakness. It was fuel. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was walking away from a story I never agreed to be part of. I didn't sleep that night. The guest room, my so-called space, felt colder than usual. The silence wasn't restful. It buzzed. Not from the hum of electronics, but from truth finally waking up after months of pretending one estating teenade. At 2:12 a.m., I picked up my phone. My hands hovered over the screen for a few seconds before scrolling down my contacts. Carolyn Walker. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Old college friend. Former roommate. Now director of a senior living community in Santa Fe. The kind of woman who always wore coral lipstick and never apologized for her opinions. I hit call. She picked up on the second ring. Luna. Her voice cracked through the line. Sleepy but alert. Is everything okay? No. I said honestly, but it will be. I paused. I didn't want to say it, but I had to. Carolyn, I need somewhere to land. She didn't ask for details. She didn't judge. She just breathed deeply and said, I've got a guest suite open. Get here as soon as you can. That was it. No guilt. No conditions. Just a door open wide enough to breathe again. At sunrise, I began to pack. One small suitcase, my favorite sweater, the old scarf Cliff gave me on our 20th anniversary, a copy of my late husband's will, my journals, and that envelope with the bank routing numbers and insurance forms my quiet backup plan. No one knocked. No one asked where I was going. No one cared. And maybe that was my answer all along. I wrote a note. Just a single line. Don't worry about me. You already stopped. I didn't even sign it. By 9:30 a.m., I was standing on the curb with my suitcase and a heart pounding hard enough to echo in my ears. I called a car to the airport. The driver didn't say much, and I appreciated that. In the terminal, I watched people move, rushing, smiling, arguing over overpriced coffee. It reminded me that the world was still big, still full of choices. I had just forgotten I was allowed to make some on the flight. I stared out the window most of the time. The clouds rolled by like silent witnesses, somewhere over the desert. I whispered to myself, "You're not a victim, Luna. You're a survivor." Again, touchdown in Santa Fe felt like stepping into a different chapter. Carolyn was there, waiting outside in her olive green Subaru, waving like we were still 22 and invincible. "You look exhausted," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I feel unfinished." "Good," she replied. "That means there's more story left." We drove in silence for a while. The sun over New Mexico looked nothing like Texas. It wasn't angry or scorching. It was soft, golden, forgiving. Carolyn pointed out desert bloom residences as we turned onto a quiet road lined with aspens. The building wasn't flashy, just clean, inviting. The kind of place with flower beds someone actually watered and rocking chairs that had been used. "You don't have to decide anything today," she said. I nodded. But I already knew. I hadn't come here to decide. I'd come here to begin. The air in Santa Fe had a scent I hadn't smelled in a long time. Clean, dry, and oddly hopeful. Even the wind seemed to whisper. "You made it." Carolyn led me into the main building of Desert Bloom Residences, a quiet oasis tucked between low desert hills and scattered pine. It didn't feel like a retirement home. It felt like a place designed for people who still wanted to live on their own terms. The entryway smelled of lemon balm and fresh-baked rolls, not bleach, not medicine. Warmth, choice, life. A receptionist named Mindy greeted us. She had short silver hair and kind eyes. "You must be Luna," she said with a smile. "Carolyn told us you'd be visiting. Welcome home." Home. That word landed like a soft blanket over my shoulders. Not heavy, just real. Carolyn showed me to the guest suite they'd arranged for me. Modest but beautiful. A small kitchenette, a sunny corner with an armchair and floor lamp, and a balcony that overlooked a courtyard blooming with lavender and sunflowers. Beyond that, I could just make out the shimmer of a koi pond. "I can't afford this," I whispered, almost embarrassed to say it out loud. Carolyn just smiled. "You don't have to figure everything out today. Just breathe. Sleep. Sit in the sun. The rest will come." And so, for the first time in months, I didn't check my bank account. I didn't glance over my shoulder. I didn't rehearse an apology in my head. I simply sat. Later that afternoon, I wandered down to the courtyard. There, 2 older women were struggling to roll up yoga mats, laughing so hard they were practically crying. One looked up and waved at me like we'd known each other for years. "You'll like the Tai Chi class," she said. "It's more about balance than backflips." I smiled, unsure if my body remembered what balance even was. I walked past the koi pond, watching the orange and white fish glide beneath the surface like thoughts that hadn't quite formed. Slow, gentle, unbothered. I sat on a bench shaded by a willow tree and let the quiet wrap around me. Not the silence I'd known back in Austin, the kind that smothered. This silence was different. It was healing. That evening, Carolyn brought me tea in a blue ceramic mug and a brochure, just one. She didn't push. She didn't sell. She simply placed it on the table beside me and said, "When you're ready." Inside the brochure was a simple description of the unit I'd just seen. Month-to-month lease. No pressure. Private balcony. Optional housekeeping. I flipped to the last page. The cost wasn't cheap, but it wasn't impossible. Not if I had control of what was rightfully mine. I looked up at Carolyn. What if I don't have access to my money anymore? Her eyes narrowed. Not in judgment, but in quiet fury. Then we get it back, she said. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But sitting there, in the golden light of a New Mexico sunset, I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer waiting for permission to exist. The next morning, I sat at Carolyn's kitchen table, a warm cup of chamomile tea in one hand, my old yellow notepad in the other. The pages were worn, creased at the corners, but the scribbles still made sense, just barely. Each line was a moment I hadn't trusted enough to confront at the time: a $142 Uber charge I never took, a new Amazon Prime membership in my name, though I hadn't watched anything since Cliff died, a PayPal withdrawal at 312 AWWW. For something called Skinverse. I didn't even know what that was. I stared at the notebook. Then I looked up at Carolyn. Am I crazy? I asked. Though I already knew the answer. She didn't flinch. You're thorough. That's scarier to people like them. She dialed her phone. 2 rings later, a calm voice answered Raymond Green. Ray. It's Carolyn. I've got someone you need to meet. That afternoon, Raymond came by, mid-70s. Neat gray suit. Quiet eyes. Hands that moved like someone used to holding truth. A retired attorney. Widowed. Wiser than most. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask if I wanted to press charges. He asked for one thing. Tell me the whole story. From the beginning. And don't skip the parts that still make you angry. So I did. I told him about the smoothie. About the missing wallet. About the logins I surrendered for convenience. About the house Blake signed into my name just to streamline medical paperwork. Then quietly acted like it was his. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I simply spoke. One wound at a time. Raymond nodded occasionally, jotting notes on a legal pad, underlining key moments. He paused when I mentioned the house. Wait, he said. The deed is in your name, I nodded. He smiled slightly. Then we're already on the offensive. He opened a file folder and slid a small packet toward me. This is a basic financial protection order. Once filed, it allows us to flag any suspicious activity tied to your identity. We'll need a list of accounts, previous charges, and anyone who had access. I reached for my yellow notepad. I've already started. Raymond glanced at the pages, eyebrows lifting with each new entry. You weren't just being taken advantage of, he said. You were being systematically erased. The word hit hard. Erased. That's exactly how it felt. Like each day I spent in that house chipped away at the outline of who I used to be. Carolyn reached over and squeezed my hand. I think it's time, she said. For what I asked? To stop surviving quietly and start living loudly? I exhaled. Not a sigh. A release. We spent the rest of the afternoon organizing papers, scanning copies, compiling timelines. I signed the protection order and gave Raymond power of attorney, temporary and limited, just enough to act on my behalf. By the time the sun dipped low behind the hills, I was exhausted, but something deeper had settled inside me. Resolve. Not vengeance. Not fear. Just the quiet fire of a woman who had nothing left to prove, and everything left to reclaim. 2 days after I signed the protection order, a woman named Carla knocked on my door at Desert Bloom. She wore a navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio, polished, professional, but with the kind of eyes that have seen too many bruised hearts. I'm your assigned real estate liaison, she said with a soft smile. Raymond sent me Carla had already scheduled a property evaluation. My house was being assessed for sale. At first, I hesitated. Selling felt final. Like I was surrendering the last physical remnant of a life I used to believe was whole. But as Carla walked me through the details, fair market value, comps, legal protection for the sale, I realized something. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing peace over permission. The next morning, Blake called me 3 times. I didn't answer. The 4th time, I did. Mom, there's some woman walking through the house with a clipboard. What is this? What the hell is going on? I kept my voice even. That woman is a real estate agent. The house is being listed for sale. He laughed. That arrogant kind of laugh that used to make me shrink. You're not serious. Oh. I'm completely serious. I said. Gently but firmly, you can't just throw us out. I'm not. You told me to leave. Remember, he went quiet. I imagined him pacing in the kitchen, right past the very fridge I had paid for. Under the light I had wired. Over the floor I helped pick. Every inch of that house bore my fingerprint, even if they spent months pretending otherwise. Mom, he said finally, his tone dropping. This is cruel. No. I replied. This is legal. He hung up. I exhaled slowly and stared at the phone. Not with regret, but with a kind of deep, ancestral relief, like my body was finally catching up to what my heart had known for weeks. I didn't owe them anything. Later that evening, Carla emailed me the formal appraisal and estimated sale range. It was more than I'd expected. Enough to not only secure my place at Desert Bloom, but to finally establish the kind of safety net I'd spent my whole life building for everyone else except myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because for the first time in years, I felt the walls around me were mine. Not just the physical ones, but the invisible ones, the ones built from boundaries, respect, and silence that wasn't surrender, but strength. I stood at the balcony, wrapped in Cliff's old cardigan, watching the koi pond glimmer beneath the soft courtyard lights. Somewhere in Austin, they were scrambling, panicking, maybe even plotting. But here, I was no longer prey to their pressure. Here, the locks turned from the inside. I turned off the light, shut the balcony door, and whispered to no one in particular, let them come. There's nothing left for them to take. It happened 3 days after the listing went live. I was in the community library at Desert Bloom, reading an article Raymond had printed out for me, Elder Financial Abuse, the Hidden Epidemic. I hadn't realized until then that I was part of a statistic. A number. 1 in 6. 1 in 10. The ratios didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I wasn't alone and I wasn't staying silent. Then came the call from the front desk. Miss Mitchell. The receptionist said gently, "There's a Blake and an Emma here to see you. Would you like us to bring them back?" I stood up, walked slowly to the sunroom, and looked through the tinted glass that separated the main lobby from the inner residence wing. There they were. Emma, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, as if she were the victim in all of this. Blake, pacing, phone in one hand, shoulders tight. And behind them, I saw something unexpected: panic. Not grief. Not guilt. Panic. I stepped back, hidden just enough by the curtain. "No," I said to the receptionist, "you don't need to bring them in, but you can let them know I'm watching." Doris, one of the building's staff, mid-50s, ex-Navy, built like a lighthouse, approached Blake with a calm but firm stance. I watched her speak without raising her voice. I saw Blake's frustration swell in his face. Red and tight. He pointed. First toward the hallway. Then toward the sky. At one point, I'm pretty sure he gestured toward the brochure rack. Like somehow that was the cause of his downfall? Emma sat down heavily on one of the chairs, chewing her gum like it was a protest. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I simply watched. I think that's what unnerved them most, my absence from their chaos. They came expecting the old version of me, the one who apologized for breathing too loud, the one who mistook kindness for permission. That Luna was gone. When Doris finally raised her hand and pointed toward the exit, Blake hesitated. Emma muttered something. I couldn't read her lips. But I knew the tone. The kind that always followed an empty request. But I need... Eventually, they left. No screaming. No second chances. Just retreat. The glass doors slid closed behind them with a satisfying finality. Like punctuation. I returned to my chair in the library and picked up the article again. But I didn't read. I just sat there, breathing. Later that afternoon, Carolyn came by with lemon cookies and asked, "You all right, I am?" I said, biting into the cookie. They came with fire. I answered with a wall. She smiled. That's how you know it's really over when their rage doesn't even scratch the surface. And she was right. I hadn't won a battle. I'd ended one. Not with revenge. Not with cruelty. With boundaries. With distance. With a door that stayed closed. 2 days after Blake and Emma were turned away at Desert Bloom, Raymond showed up at my door holding a manila envelope and a quiet kind of urgency. They made another move. He said. He stepped inside and laid out the documents on my kitchen table. In the center was a printed image of a check. My name? My signature. The same account I hadn't accessed in months. But the amount, $3. Whoopay. The memo line read, car repairs. I hadn't written that check. Raymond flipped to another page. Your bank's fraud department caught it. The trust flagged it immediately. They tried to cash it at a drive-through branch in Austin yesterday. Was it Blake? I asked. He shook his head. It was Emma. On camera. She used your driver's license. The one reported missing last month. I sat back in my chair. I should have felt shocked. But all I felt was... affirmed. They hadn't just hoped I'd go away. They thought I was disposable, easy to impersonate. Easier to forget. They're not going to stop. Are they? I said quietly. No. Raymond replied. But the law just started paying attention. That afternoon, 2 plainclothes officers from the Elder Protection Unit came to Desert Bloom. Not dramatic. Not invasive. Respectful. Like visiting an old friend who had something important to say. I led them to the community meeting room and laid out everything photocopies of forged transactions. A printed email Blake once sent to the mortgage company pretending to be my authorized representative. And my yellow notepad pages now full of annotations. Circled dates. Highlighted withdrawals. One of the officers, Detective Monroe. 2 leafed through the records and gave a low whistle. You weren't confused. He said. You were robbed. Slowly. Strategically. He looked at me. Not with pity but with recognition. You'd be shocked how often this happens. But rarely do we get the whole map. I kept the receipts. I said, even when they told me not to worry, by the end of the hour, my statement was recorded. The documents were entered as evidence. The case was officially opened. I walked them to the lobby. And just before stepping outside, Detective Monroe turned and said, "You're not the only one this is happening to, but you're one of the few who fought back early enough." I nodded. It wasn't early. It was just early enough. Later that evening, Carolyn brought by a folder updates from the trust attorney. My assets were now fully locked. No transactions without my fingerprint. The house was officially under contract. I'd already signed the seller's disclosure. Everything that had once felt stolen was now shielded. I sat on the balcony with a glass of iced tea, watching the koi fish circle gently in the pond below. Their movement was slow, certain like they'd never questioned the space they took up. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone recovering. I felt like someone preparing not for battle but for the life that was still mine. No more explanations. No more permissions. Just Luna, back in possession of her name, her story, and her future. It was a Thursday afternoon when the front desk buzzed my suite again. "There's a Chloe at the front lobby asking to see you," the receptionist said gently. Not Blake. Not Emma. Chloe. The one who had always worn cruelty like perfume, subtle at first, then choking. "She says it's urgent." I didn't pause. "Let her know I'm not available." "She's not taking it well." I stood up, walked quietly to the sunroom near the lobby, and slipped behind the one-way glass. There she was. Chloe stood in front of the reception desk in a fitted blazer, far too expensive for someone crying financial hardship. Her face was tight, her voice even tighter. She pointed toward the back hallway, then toward the main entrance, as if trying to direct the narrative like she always did. This wasn't a mother-in-law trying to reconnect. This was a strategist seeing her grip slip. I watched as Doris, steady and calm as ever, approached. Chloe leaned in, her hands gesturing wildly. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. I'd heard them before. "I didn't mean to. We were just trying to help. You're overreacting. You're ruining this family." Eventually, Chloe turned to the glass entrance doors and scanned the room. For a moment, our eyes met. She didn't know I could see her, but I could. And I didn't blink. I didn't wave. I didn't move. I simply existed steady every day. Still. Behind the protection of locked glass and earned boundaries. That's when Chloe's expression changed. She realized I wasn't coming out. Not now. Not ever. Doris stepped forward and opened the door. Chloe tried one last attempt, a gesture, a phrase, maybe even my name. But I turned away. I went back to the library, picked up the book I had been reading earlier, something light, nothing serious. I flipped the page as if she had never arrived. That evening, Gerald Raymond's nephew and the trust's junior paralegal stopped by with a few new documents for my signature. After I finished, he lingered by the kitchen island. "She really came all the way down here?" he asked. "Yep. And she left." He smiled. "You didn't even flinch." "I already said goodbye. She's just now hearing it." I poured us both a glass of lemonade and sat across from him at the little bistro table by the window. Outside, the wind stirred the ivy around the koi pond. Peace was no longer a concept. It was a choice one I made every day. Before Gerald left, I handed him a folded note. "What's this?" he asked. "Just something I want filed with the trust documents." He opened it and read aloud, "If they ever call again, tell them this. The version of me that would have answered no longer lives here." He nodded, folded the note carefully, and placed it into his briefcase. That night, I stood on the balcony in my robe, cup of tea warming my hands, and watched the stars rise like tiny promises in the dark. They might come back. They might beg. They might scream. But the door stays locked. And this time, I hold the only key. It arrived on a Tuesday. A pale ivory envelope slipped into my mailbox at Desert Bloom. Handwritten. Slanted cursive that tried to look elegant but pressed too hard on the page. Chloe. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the small writing desk in my suite. Right where Cliff used to sort our bills. Right where I used to write holiday cards and birthday notes. Back when family still felt like a promise. I made a cup of tea. I let the light hit the room just right. Then I opened it. The first word wasn't dear. It wasn't sorry. It was simply Mom. As if that title still belonged to her. As if we could rewind. The letter read exactly as expected. A soft, shaky opening about how things got out of hand. How they didn't mean to hurt me. How it all happened so fast. The word misunderstanding was thrown around like a blanket, too thin to cover anything real. But the third paragraph, that's where the truth spilled out. We're in a tough spot now. She wrote. Blake's accounts are frozen. Emma didn't get approved for her car loan. We're behind on utilities. And then came the ask. Maybe you can help just one last time. For Emma. For family. There it was. The same hook. The same bait wrapped in nostalgia and veiled as affection. A familiar trap. Inside the envelope was something else. A check. Drawn in my name. Signed with my forged signature. San. Bye-bye. In the memo, support for Emma's college apps. I stared at it. Not with shock. Not with rage. But with clarity. They weren't writing to reconnect. They were writing because the money was gone. I folded the letter in half. Then again. And slid it into the shredder beside the front desk. Then I stood by the koi pond. Watching the fish drift like tiny ghosts of every part of me I'd let them take. And I whispered not to them, but to myself, you don't get to speak my name when it's convenient. You don't get to ask for warmth after you poured cold silence down my back. That night, Gerald stopped by with fresh lemon cake and a new trust update. Everything's official now. He said, the sale went through. The money's protected. The case is filed. I looked out the window. The stars just starting to bloom above the desert hills. You know what's funny, I said. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. He smiled. That's what freedom feels like. We sat in silence, sipping tea and sharing cake. Not as lawyer and client. Not even as old friends. Just as two people who understood that sometimes the loudest form of healing is walking away and never looking back. When Gerald left, I returned to my room, pulled out my journal, and wrote one final sentence. I wasn't saved. I rose. Then I closed the book, turned out the light, and let peace have the last word. Daughter.